Good morning. My name is Don Pascal, and I was sitting in seats just like yours on Parents' Weekend last spring. I attended some classes, was psyched to see our children and their teachers in action, and then settled in this auditorium for some great Saturday morning content from our headmaster. Sound familiar? We heard from Tim O'Neill, and he spoke about the strong Parents Fund momentum. Then bam, now I'm up here as co-chair of the Parents Fund, along with my very capable wife, Maris. It's like that line from a Talking Heads song. Well, how did I get here? You'll be happy to know Maris and I are passionate about the Taft Parents Fund for a couple of really good reasons. And about 570 other reasons, that's the number of Taft boarding and day students, children of yours, that learn something new here every day on this special campus. The Parents Fund is a crucial piece of the foundation here at Taft, and I want to explain why. And like any athletic contest or school year, it's got a first half and a second half. The first half is about the parents, and the second half is about the fund. I think there are two equally important groups of parents here at Taft. Some of you knew Taft well before your child started here. Others of you are new to Taft. Maris and I were the latter. We did not know Taft. First, our children connected with Taft, and then we did. As one Taft trustee recently said at an event, I think the Taft parents have as much fun here as the kids. With that settled, Taft is home, wherever you're on campus. And this weekend, we're trying a new idea. On the athletic fields this afternoon, we're going to have a hospitality tent for parents. It's there for you. So if you have a moment, stroll up, have a cup of coffee or hot chocolate, it'll be dry under there, and meet some other parents who are just as interested in meeting you. It's another step towards linking our parents' community even more. And now on to the second half of the idea, the fund. The Parents Fund provides vital resources to help run the school. Tuition only covers about 2/3 of the cost of each student. Last year, our parent body achieved a 95% participation rate in the 2011 Parents Fund. That is outstanding by any measure versus all schools throughout the country. You cared and you gave. Those funds made up just under half of total annual giving. Right now, the global economy is still a little rocky. So how are we as parents going to look at our individual roles in the 2011 to 2012 Parents Fund? Let me suggest two approaches. First, some of you will be able to participate by making larger financial gifts. That's the way all annual funds work. We think about what's important to us and make priorities. There are countless great nonprofit causes around, and their missions are worthy of support. However, very few of them so directly impact the education and maturation of our children as Taft. A gift to the Parents Fund goes directly into the richness of the programs here at Taft. There is a direct connection between your gift, the school year, and the immediate experience of your child. Maris and I have already made Taft a top priority on our annual giving list. Second, some of you will be able to participate in another very meaningful way, by giving what you can and keeping our participation rate sky high. Every single gift speaks volumes in terms of morale, momentum, and community. Think what it's like to be a faculty member and know that the parents' participation is so high. What's it like for students to know this? They get the math. And what's it like for each one of us to look right now to the two people to your left, the two people to your right, to the two people to your front, and to the two people to your back, and know that all those people plus yourself gave and need to give to the Parents Fund to achieve that 95% figure. And now I have a question for you. Why not take advantage of last year's momentum, and what do you say we go for the all-time record of 96% participation? Please engage, take that call from a Parents Committee volunteer, and fill out a response form sooner rather than later. There is no donation too small to send a wonderful message to our community. So let's wrap up with some perspective on that awesome 95% parent participation rate from last year. It's a legendary number. But I ask you another question. When your child goes into a class or an exam, do you say, give it 95%? When your child hits the athletic field or pursues a hobby, do you say, give it your full 95%? I don't think so. So why not take our own advice? Let's give this Parents Fund our 100% or our 100-something%. Maybe our gift is in significant dollars because we can, or maybe our gift is more about participation because of the powerful message that it sends to faculty, students, and each other. You will be contacted by members of the Parents Committee to have a dialogue about the Parents Fund. These committee members are volunteering their time to make this community as vital as it's ever been. So thanks very much for first, receiving those calls, and second, for supporting Taft in your own personal way. And now I'm pleased to yield the floor to Willie McMullen. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Don and Maris, for all you do. And I've said it before, obviously, but I believe deeply in this school, and I think it's a great one. But a lot of the reasons we're great is because of what you do, and we couldn't do it without you. So for everything you do, I'm deeply grateful. And I hope today's a wonderful day. I heard some funny comment as one of your children asked me right outside as I walked in, Mr. Mack, do we have to stay and hear you talk? What a great vote of confidence, you know. It's been an interesting week. I mentioned some parents last night. I've been besieged by students, and that's because they want to know if there's a headmaster's holiday. And during the time when there's the possibility of a holiday, everything on campus becomes freighted with significance. It's viewed through that lens. 2 nights ago, we had some problems with the internet during study hall, and the kids all said, well, that's because there's going to be a holiday, you see. So everything is, and to make it worse, my birthday was a few days ago, and so then it was, well, obviously we're going to get a holiday. And of course, I'm not going to do that. And I got a bunch of emails, and I shared this one with some parents last night, but this says everything you need to know about how smart our students are. So I got this. Mr. Mack, first of all, and most importantly, happy birthday. Now, a man of your respect and stature, I mean, the sucking up is so obvious. A man of your respect and stature deserves more than just a birthday. You should even there should even be a holiday for you. Luckily, Headmaster's holiday is coming up. I think Tafties will allow you to be selfish. You may be permitted to have tomorrow off if you really want it. I just thought it was a thought-provoking idea. You should probably sleep on it. So, by the way, you can help me if they ask you. You can simply say, Mr. Mack assured us that there would be a holiday this year, okay? That's all you have to say. Here's what I want to talk about today. It's about something I've been thinking about a lot for the last few years, in particular this fall, and it's about 9/11. It's about the 10th anniversary of those September attacks, and really what we learned about Taft from that day, and also a larger question, that is what changed for schools after 9/11. So I want to try to put the day in some historical context, and I will say some things about the way the community responded, but I do not want at the end the message to be simply, this was a very strong community when it faced crisis. That's not really quite my point. I want to suggest that after 9/11, we had a different kind of teenager. And I don't think it's a story that's been told enough. And so I want to speak about what kind of teenager I see in the days afterwards. If you're going to start with 9/11, I think, interestingly, the place to begin is actually December 7th, 1941. And immediately you know what I'm talking about. And the parallels are many. The immediate experience of the school after those 2 surprise attacks was very similar. And I know this partly because in the days after 9/11, I received many letters from men who were here during Pearl Harbor. And one of them shared memories, and he wrote this: I remember, Mr. McMullen, so well the same feelings which swept Taft on December 7th, 1941, when as young men we could not believe what was taking place at Pearl Harbor. It was shortly after lunch. when all of us were on the floor and we were called into the apartment of Mr. Douglas, and we huddled near his radio, hardly knowing where Pearl Harbor even was. A number of our class immediately enlisted, and our lives would be forever changed. He might have, of course, been describing the school 10 years ago. That sudden storm of war, the flying debris of confusion and fear, the steady calm of a teacher, the awareness that the landscape had been forever altered, and the strength of a community in the eye of a tempest. Now, we can travel back to that December day. Alongside the news that the basketball team had beaten Calhoun College at Yale, and a write-up of a lecture, I thought this was interesting, by a Pinkerton detective on the techniques of card sharps. Why would you be talking about that to Taft students? I have no idea. But alongside that, the editors of the Papyrus wrote this: "We feel sure that none of us even so much as imagined an event such as the bombing of American possessions. On Sunday morning, we would have scoffed at the suggestion of an attack so fantastic as that which the Japanese launched on Hawaii. Sunday afternoon, there was peace. Monday morning, war. For our ears today, it has a familiar ring. You can imagine the chaos in the days afterwards, in particular when you didn't have the kind of information we do today. The Papyrus reference, quote, rumors going around which would make one believe that the country is already gone. The Empire Building has crashed, New York bombed, German planes 10 minutes away. You see boys listening on radios, trading scraps of gossip and bartering rumors in the dormitories. A week later, the newspaper noted, and I quote, "It is improbable that Taft will undergo an air raid in the near future. But yet we must ask boys to watch the night for invading planes." And you think of some lower mid away from home for the first time, stricken in his bed with an eye through the curtained window. Many boys didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. They turned to teachers who had few answers. There were long lines at the 2 payphones in the dormitory. On that evening, there was a Bach cantata playing in this room as the school quietly filed in to hear Headmaster Cruikshank and 80-year-old Horace Taft address them, Taft leading them in the Lord's Prayer. One alum recalled how at sit-down dinner that night, Mr. Reardon assured them that the war would end quickly, and he recalled him saying, quote, "It's doubtful that any of you will see action." And I wonder whether this great history teacher really believed that. He was, of course, sitting at a table of boys. That night, 2 seniors ran away to enlist. At 11 o'clock the next day, the school gathered here in Bingham to listen to Roosevelt's address on the radio, and when they walked out, the phrase, "a day that will live in infamy," went with them. The school responded exactly as you'd imagine. It responded as one. The Papyrus noting that the senior class had, quote, almost to a man, volunteered to take part in plane spotting activities on the football field. Incredible, we think to ourselves, and yet actually not so. Headmaster Cruikshank announced that Watertown was looking for volunteers for a civilian defense organization, and hundreds of boys volunteered. Near the advertisement for Camel cigarettes, 28% less nicotine, students saw an editorial asking them, quote, in all matters, to show a healthy spirit of cooperation. They read of a meeting asking to cancel the dance to raise funds for the war effort, a failed meeting, the writer sniffed. A letter from a senior saying, we must be willing to give all in sacrifice and courage. And of course, faculty were leaving in a steady exodus in the Army, the Navy, handshakes in the main circle. 10 faculty alone in 1943, and this in a faculty of 26. And what of the boys? Yes, boys. What of them? The 1943 annual listed 13 who left before the year was out. And if you look closely in the annual, and you look next to their name, on every senior's page, there's either an F for a February graduation or a J for June. There's a very quiet note I found, a small print that belies larger sacrifice. Quote, consequently, it will be noticed that there are 2 chairmen for many of the listed organizations. 1944 had 3 head monitors. So the essence of this school showed itself after Pearl Harbor, a place that was bound tight, teachers and students, I think, brought together by both fear and faith, by service and by sacrifice. It was a community that was made whole and sturdy and resilient. Fast forward, the actual day on September 11th, 2001, and it was eerily similar. I remember it vividly, as you can imagine. On September 10th, the day before our first day of classes, I welcomed new students, just the way I welcomed all of you in the last few years. It was a glorious day. I remember that. Pam and I were out in the Centennial Quad, in that long line of parents that I met, and all of you driving off, all the parents driving off with those kind of confused feelings we feel when our children grow up, fears and excitement. And the next morning was our opening day of classes. And I had prepared some remarks, obviously. It was my opening address, and I was looking over them in my office. And of course, in those days, and even to this day, I don't come in the office. No faculty member comes into an office and watches the news. I was walking down the hall to do a sound check here. And Peter Frew rushed up to me in the hall, right out here, and said, "Willie, did you hear that a plane has run into the World Trade Center?" And my reaction was what everybody's was. I said, "What the hell is a little Cessna doing flying in Lower Manhattan? Why would that ever happen?" And then later, I found myself in Mr. Davis's office. And there was a tiny TV in there that we used for evening study halls and duty. And we were looking at that TV together. Rusty and I were looking at it together. And the first tower crumbled in front of us. And he, the engineer, knew it before I did. And he turned to me, he said, "We have lost them all. We've lost them all." I gave my remarks right here, not knowing any of the details yet. And we went off to class, but as the truth emerged almost immediately, and as I gathered the team of leaders on campus, we knew we had to gather here. We had to do what Taft has always done. We had to be a community in this space. And so we had a special assembly hours, a few hours later. I spoke, we prayed. But we also got right back to work that day. We had team practices, we had sit-down dinner, we had study hall, we had all of the classes. And I recall telling the students, I said, "Make sure you understand, life is going to go on. If you are late for class tomorrow, you will get grades." And I was trying to be a bit funny, but you know what else I was doing. I was trying to suggest, and I think every teacher was trying to suggest, that we can create a sense of safety if we can create routine. If we can somehow say that this is a new year and we've got important work to do and we need to start at it right now. There were informal gatherings in the dormitories. Every advisor found his or her advisee within hours. Colleagues reached out to each other because many teachers had friends in the city. One couple here had a son who worked in the financial district. He got through to his parents, both faculty members, telling them that he could see people jumping. Alumni checked in. For some reason, they felt this was the place to check in, and so we received calls. So-and-so was okay, but no word yet on so-and-so. Happily, the calls continued, each one a blessing. Parents called, scared, angry, numb, relieved. Students piled into faculty apartments to talk, just to be near a grown-up. A girl whose uncle was killed, that our only direct casualty, was surrounded by friends and teachers. When the last Taft parent was accounted for, and I recall this, I was in my office with about 10 faculty members, administrators. The door burst open, interrupted us, and there was some students yelling, "Mr. Mack, Jenny's mother's just called, she's okay." And with that, we knew that the last parent who was in the building was fine. We had study hall that night, and yes, I asked teachers to give homework, and then it was lights, and the campus was silent. A lot of dorm faculty stayed up far into the night, walking the halls, peering into rooms to make sure students were asleep. 2 days later, I found one former Taft father. It happened to be a boy that I'd coached on my soccer team. And this, of all the memories, I think is my most poignant. He was walking on the soccer field in the early afternoon, and his eyes red and wet. And I didn't know who it was. I just saw a man walk in the field, and I walked up to him. And I saw him. I said, "Hi, John, what's going on?" He said, "Mr. Mack, you know, my son spent 4 years here. He works in the towers, and he's okay. But you know why? He stopped on the way because he's a typical bachelor. He had nothing to eat, and he bought a box of Rice Krispies, so he was late getting to work." Rice Krispies. We were the same school that day that we were when Paul Cruikshank spoke in his room on that gray December day. But as I said, I really don't want the takeaway to be Taft's an extraordinary community. I think you know that, and I hope it will always be. In terms of the courage and closeness of the place, clearly those two events were similar. But the more we look at those 2 days, it's more clear that the narratives diverge in the years afterwards. And so history teaches us a different lesson. Taft, a decade after 1941, looked very much like the one it was on December 7th. Not identical, of course, but the school was largely similar, the educational practices similar, and I think, in fact, the student of the school not much different than the one 10 years ago. Put simply, a day at Taft in 1951 looked a lot like the day at Taft in 1941. Nobody would claim that that's the case today. 9/11 ushered in a decade of profound change that I think rivals any decade in the entire history of this school. For our work at Taft, I have always felt that there was a before 9/11 and an after 9/11, and I think schools need to embrace that reality. What's changed? This is what's changed. We got connected. Look at a few dates. MySpace, 2003. Facebook, 2004. Twitter, 2006. The iPhone, 2007. Look at the history of texting. According to a Nielsen survey last year, today's teenagers average, and if I asked you this question, I wonder how many would get close. It surprised even me. Average 3,340 texts a month. That's our children. 15% send more than 200 text messages a day. For them, it is statistically, and this has been borne out by every survey done, it is the leading contact method for friends, exceeding cell phone calls, landlines, IM, and for many face-to-face talks. That is, there are many teenagers who report more hours texting than they do in face-to-face relationships. Before 9/11, few teenagers even knew what SMS meant. Look at social networking usage. Facebook did not exist in 2001. The numbers of users has increased every single year since its inception, in particular among teens, where now approximately 80% have profiles. You may have noticed that 2 weeks ago, the New York Times reported that there are about 7.5 million under age 12 boys and girls who use Facebook. And interestingly, there may actually be a legal challenge on whether that's a violation of the 2000 Children's Online Privacy Act. All this is since 2001. There has never been a decade like it. Whether the 9/11 attacks created or accelerated or amplified that, we could quibble about, but there is no question that the world of adolescence changed. After 9/11 is about connectivity. It is marked by the fact that we are, all of us, and in particular our sons and daughters, tethered to the net and to each other. You cannot say this about the decade before. Within a few years of the attacks, the phone became a mobile device, capable of texting, net connection, email, shopping, gaming, photo, document sharing, mapping, blogging, social networking. It's an extraordinarily powerful piece. You were not holding a phone in your hand. You were holding a talisman of safety, a passport for international internet travel, a cord that bound you to a community of others. And this is particularly true for adolescents. Nothing has shaped adolescent development, and by implication, secondary education, more than that fact. The fact is, students we teach today live in a very different world than the ones we taught before 9/11. The question that has left us as a school is this: what challenges and opportunities does a learning community have when its members live connected lives? And I do not want this to appear in any way as an anti-technology talk, because it's not. We should remember that, first, that the social and psychological and intellectual and emotional benefit of being connected is real. This is a point, by the way, that MIT professor Sherry Turkle makes. She's the author of a book called Alone Together: Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. I would argue that this is one of the single most important books I've read in the last decade. Alone Together: Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. After all, she reminds us, she says, this technology began with very modest aims. That is, network technology began with the simple aim of information sharing. It really began in the medical community. Simple information sharing. And then she writes this: it became something else and more. We began by thinking that emails, texts, Facebook messaging are thin gruel, but useful if the alternative is sparse communication with people we care about. Then we became accustomed to those special pleasures, that we can have a connection when and where we need it. We can easily make it go away. In only a few steps, you have people describing life on Facebook as better than anything they have known. For parents of teenagers, this may ring true. In this narrative, being connected is about gain. It is about power and information. It's about belonging. It's about emotionally and psychically being completed on the internet. It is a good story, and it's true. It is, however, never that simple. And this is what you see if you think about what it means to teach these students. What I've seen as a school and what our faculty sees is something far more complicated. And the observations I would make about teenagers today, I could not have made even 10 years ago. Here's the first, and this is borne out by survey after survey. Post 9/11 connected teenagers report that life is stressful when you are connected. When you live a connected life, that there is always a sense that you're a little bit behind. You're always playing catch up. In the culture of texting, the expectation of a rapid reply is shared. A day without a phone, or an hour even, feels as if you are arriving at the starting line for a race that is already over. Facebook has its own pace, its own pressure. There's a lot to do if you're going to be active, profiling, poking, posting, adding, deleting. Think of the 17-year-old boy who sums it up perfectly. He says, you have to give to Facebook to get from Facebook. There's a pressure to give all the time. Think of the girl who says this, you feel rude if you don't keep up. Students are on a technological treadmill dialed up. Second, teenagers report that being connected means, and we've seen this from observation, that you live a life of multitasking. Post 9/11 students do a lot of things at the same time. They read a book while they update Facebook, while they text a friend and download a song. How many of you seen some version of that? For teachers and parents, attention competes with online games, shopping, Facebook, IM, Twitter, text, videos, and calls. We run study hall with students who are accustomed to moving in and out of these technologies fluidly, their attention moving constantly. And by the way, it's a mixed bag, and the jury is still out on how important and successful that is. From those who argue that multitasking is a critical 21st century skill, to those who argue that in fact it simply spreads poor performance across more areas. And I really mean that. The data is at this point is inconclusive. So, in addition to multitasking, and in addition to the stress, third, it's this. Post 9/11 adolescents live tied to their mobile device, and it means that they live in a state of constant interruption, which is paradoxically experienced as normal and even welcome. And here's what's remarkable. We might expect that this fact, that you will be interrupted at times, would be really annoying. But when Turkle interviewed countless students, this is not what she found. They weren't bothered at all. On one occasion, she remembers describing a group to recall a moment of feeling when you didn't want to be interrupted. And she was sure that she was going to hear accounts. What did it feel like to have that sense that you didn't want to be interrupted? And she was met with a confused silence. Her subjects had no stories. A boy said happily, I'm waiting to be interrupted now. So they live lives of constant interruption. Fourth, the post 9/11 adolescent explores self in new ways today. If being a teenager has always fundamentally been about shaping identity, it now takes place in a significant measure in the networked world. You could not have said that in 2000. Turkle's research reveals that subjects see themselves as different people, even better people, as a result of their connectivity. She writes, connectivity offers new possibilities for experimenting with identity, and in particular in adolescence, for doing what adolescents really need to do, to fall in love, in and out of love with people and ideas. Real life doesn't always provide this kind of space. The internet does. Our sons and daughters now author themselves not only in the physical world, but also to a great extent online. And it is stressful to do this, she notes. She says, remember how difficult it is to think of yourself in what she calls short smoke signals that are easy to read. where everything is a token, a marker for who we are. Choosing those markers is not easy. You can understand the girl she quotes, quote, "Friendship on the internet is more demanding than in real life. It's not easy thinking of the self in smoke signals." Finally, for teenagers today, the need to be connected is felt intensely. Turkle writes this, and this rang so true for me, and I'm sure for many of you. Teenagers report a deep discomfort when they are without their cell phones. They need to be connected in order to feel like themselves. The teenager who's always with his device on vacation, in the classroom, yes, in the bathroom, he or she is neither an exception nor somehow unhealthily fragile or narcissistic. So that's today's teenager. I would not have said this 10 years ago. Linked to the net, seeking identity in the digital world, perpetually in an interrupted conversation with fragmented attention, continually feeding a web of network relationships. What I have described has enormous benefits and also important challenges for our work. That student, I think, is very well served by a school that knows its students well, but it also means that the role of the teacher in post-9/11 has changed, and I would argue changed in 3 ways. I'm not sure whether you'd notice this in these 3 ways just on your visit today, but I would argue the post-9/11 teacher has to do 3 things that we didn't 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. First is this. I think Taft teachers have to become interrupters. Not a glorious title, is it? But our sons and daughters are tied to the net, and so minutes with them where we cut the internet umbilical cord are more important than any point in our history. The academic classroom, the athletic practice, the music rehearsal, lunch with an advisee, a visit in the apartment, these are times when students must experience a social media and mobile device break, when their attention has to be on teacher, classmates, and material. They are moments of enormous latent power. When we enforce a media fast on our students, we require their attention and we give ours. We make them do something they rarely do on a given day. I'd say second, educators become coaches in the skills of interpersonal interaction and relationship building. These skills are significant, they are subtle, and they're different than the skills that are needed online. The fact of the matter is, now I sound grumpily old-fashioned, but I believe a lot of teenagers are underskilled in this way. They have lost a lot of interpersonal practice hours. Think of the texting boy that Turkle quotes who explains, "Later in life, I'll need to learn how to have a conversation, to learn to find common ground so I know how to talk." These are acquired skills. There is no magic or mystery here. You need a teenager spending time with a fully present adult. And this happens every day, everywhere on our campus, and I would argue that it's an explicit part of our mission. When I hear visitors say, and this I hear often, your students seem so comfortable with adults, I feel that some critical part of our invisible curriculum has succeeded. They're skills that we have to take on as a school. And third and most important is this. The boarding school teacher can offer moments of physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual focus that are incredibly powerful, all the more so because today they are exceptional, and they take place in an era when teenagers spend less time with adults and rarely get their undivided attention. Many of today's teenagers live on reduced rations of adult attention. Turkle writes, "Longed for here is the pleasure of full attention, coveted and rare. These teenagers grew up with parents who talked on cell phones and scrolled through messages on the walk to the playground. There's no blame here, I'm one of them. We read to them while the BlackBerry buzzed in the lap, and years later took calls on the vacation ski lift." After interviewing one group of boys, Turkle concluded, "These young people are asking for time, touch, attention, and immediacy. They are deeply curious about a world where people deal in the tangible and did one thing at a time." She's describing, I think, what a day at Taft has to be, comprised of coherently patterned episodes of an intense adult attention. The school was founded on the premise that educating the whole student required emotionally empathic, morally robust, and intellectually provocative connection with students. Our mission has always rested on the shoulders of adults who are emphatically present, and this we take to be our purpose. But I think we have to do it better than ever in this post-9/11 student. Our challenge, I think, is to ensure that our efforts scale up to the need. So there's been a lot written about what changed in economic, political, and social terms after 9/11. You've read all the articles, you've read the books. I do not think that enough has been written about how the post-9/11 adolescent changed as well, and with that, secondary schools. It is an enormously subtle and complex narrative. It's one we're still trying to understand. It's taken me 10 years, and I'm still learning. It's a new world, as they say, and I don't think that the leaders after Pearl Harbor would have been speaking in quite the same way. But we can say it now. 9/11 changed everything about adolescence, where being tied to the net means an existence that is at once one of empowerment and in diffusion, of community and isolation, of belonging and longing, of gain and loss. This is not an anti-technology talk. We can't go back to some digital free innocence. We took that bite from Apple long ago. That knowledge has led to an incredibly exciting and some of the most effective teaching, far more effective than I ever would have dreamed of. We need to embrace that post-9/11 connected world. I think we have to view it with a clear and critical eye. We have to seize the opportunities that are there. We have to embrace the new roles thrust upon teachers. Our world changed 10 years ago. And you know what? There's a lot I like in it. A lot that's made us a better school. A lot that leads me to believe in teenagers. A lot that makes me very optimistic about the future. The story of connection is a wonderful one. But as I said, it's a complex one. And I might even add that it's sad. Turkle says this: online we feel enhanced, but our moments of more may leave us with lives of less. Networked we are together, but so lessened are our expectations of each other that we can feel utterly alone. That single sentence speaks volumes about what it is to be a teenager, to be your sons and daughters. It fairly shouts out the challenges of schools like Taft. It will not be easy work. It is the most satisfying labor imaginable. And if we wondered what kind of school would be best suited for the connected age, for today's adolescence, who is at once connected and alone, I might have created a school that looked something like Taft. And so with that sense of the challenge we have and the opportunities, and with a great sense of gratitude that you are all here, and with hopes that you have a wonderful day, I thank you for coming to Taft and being part of the Taft family. Thank you.